Tonight, we step quietly into another time. The Tang Dynasty, an age of poetry, painting, and quiet scholarship. Somewhere, behind a courtyard wall, a lone scholar prepares for his evening. The work of the day is done. The air is cool with the scent of bamboo and ink. A small lamp waits to be lit, and beside it, a teapot ready to pour. We will walk slowly through these hours with him. From the moment he grinds the inkstone, to the gentle turning of pages, to the way his gaze lingers on the moonlit garden beyond his window. There is no urgency here, no weight of time, only the slow rhythm of brush, breath, and thought. As the lantern glows and the night deepens, the room will fill with the warmth of tea and the murmur of ancient poetry. Outside, the bamboo will sway, and the stones in the courtyard will glisten under the silver light of the moon. Let the day fall away. Leave behind the clamor of the world. Here, in the quiet study of a Tang Dynasty scholar, there is only stillness and the gentle company of the night. The scholar's evening awakens. The sun has not quite vanished, yet its warmth has already left the courtyard stones. It is the kind of winter evening in Chang'an when the air is thin, light as paper ash, carrying with it the distant notes of a bamboo flute from some unknown corner of the city. The scholar's narrow lane is lined with bare persimmon trees, their twisted branches reaching out like brushstrokes upon the pale sky. Red lanterns hang at every doorway, their silk skins already beginning to glow faintly in the gathering dusk. Your journey to the study begins here, in this quiet street, where the smells of sesame oil and roasting chestnuts drift from a neighbor's brazier. Passing a merchant's cart laden with scrolls and brushes, you notice how the merchant has wrapped himself in a heavy quilted robe, his breath curling like pale smoke in the cold. The scholar's home lies just beyond a carved wooden gate, its panels etched with curling clouds and the shapes of cranes in flight. You step through and into the inner courtyard, where a stone path leads between two rectangles of raked gravel, a miniature pine tree rising like a green flame from one corner. The scholar is already inside. Through the latticed window, you catch the faint shape of his silhouette, the straight back, the long sleeves, the quiet incline of his head as he leans over the low table. Inside, his study is not grand, yet every object is deliberate. Scroll racks, a bronze incense burner in the shape of a crouching lion, a set of nested porcelain bowls for brewing tea. The air smells of sandalwood and the faint mineral tang of freshly ground ink. A brazier of glowing charcoal sits at the scholar's side, its warmth a small island in the otherwise cool room. Beside it, a clay teapot rests on a stand, steam just beginning to coil upward. This evening, the scholar intends no great work, no audience with officials, no recitation before a patron. It is an evening for himself, to steep the right leaves, to grind ink until the stone whispers, to let his brush move as it will, perhaps to read a few lines from a scroll he has not touched in years. The lanterns will be lit when the shadows have grown long enough, and the moon will rise over the courtyard wall. There will be no haste here. The night will unfold like a scroll unrolling under the patient hand. Every action, the lifting of a kettle lid, the smoothing of a scroll's edge, will be its own moment, unhurried, complete. You step closer, and the sounds of the street behind you fade. In their place, the slow scrape of ink against stone, the faint chime of a teacup being set down, the gentle sigh of the brazier as another piece of charcoal settles. The scholar glances up, as if he has been expecting you. He gestures with his smile to the cushion opposite his own, and the evening begins. Grinding ink, preparing tea. The scholar begins with the inkstone. It is not the first object one might expect in such a moment. Tea, perhaps, or arranging the lamp. But to him, the inkstone is the foundation of the night. Without ink, there will be no calligraphy, and without calligraphy, there will be no true settling of the mind. He draws the stone nearer. It is a flat oval, carved from a deep, almost blue-black slate. Its surface smooth as river-polished pebble except for the shallow basin at one end. Beside it rests the ink stick, a slender black bar, its surface decorated with faint gold characters that proclaim its maker's name and the region from which its soot was gathered. He pours a thread of clear water into the basin, then sets the stick to stone. The first strokes are dry, almost silent. Then, as the surface moistens, a gentle rasping sound begins, the sound of soot loosening from its home and binding itself to water. His hands move in slow circles, the stick gliding with practiced weight, never hurried. The scent rises almost at once. It is a scent older than the dynasty itself, warm, resinous, with a hint of pine and a darkness that is hard to name. You notice how the scholar pauses occasionally, lifting the stick to examine the ink pooling in the basin, testing the richness of its color with the tip of his brush. As the ink gathers, he reaches for the teapot. It is a simple vessel of Ishan clay, unglazed but darkened from years of use. The leaves he has chosen tonight are curled and small, their green still deep despite the months since harvest. He does not measure them by eye alone. Instead, he tilts the bamboo scoop, letting the leaves slide into the pot until they make a faint whispering sound against the clay. The kettle beside the brazier has already begun to hum softly, a prelude to the brighter music of boiling. The scholar lifts it carefully, pouring just enough hot water to awaken the leaves, not to brew them fully. The first infusion is not for drinking. It is to rinse the leaves, to let them unfurl from their tight spirals, to release their first breath into the air. He waits only a moment before tipping the water out into a waste bowl, the steam carrying a delicate fragrance that lingers in the air. Outside the latticed windows, the last traces of sunlight have withdrawn, leaving the sky the color of pale, indigo ink wash. A lantern has been lit in the courtyard, and its glow plays softly against the paper screens, blurring the outlines of the pine tree beyond. The scholar grinds a little longer, until the ink in the basin is dark and heavy. He tests it once more, brushing a short stroke onto a scrap of paper. The line is deep, unbroken, and dries to a rich matte. Satisfied, he rinses the stick and returns it to its case, where it rests like a treasured blade in its scabbard. Only now does he turn fully to the tea. He fills the pot again, this time with water, just shy of boiling, and covers it with a snug clay lid. He places a porcelain cup before you, thin, translucent, painted with a faint motif of plum blossoms, and one for himself. Neither of you speaks as the tea steeps. The only sound is the shifting of the coals and the faint tapping of water condensing under the kettle lid. When the time feels right, for here there is no counting of minutes, he pours, the amber liquid flowing in a smooth arc, steam rising to brush against your face. The tea tastes of the mountain slopes from which it came. Soft earth, spring rain, the faint bitterness of fresh growth. In this way, the scholar has woven together two strands of his evening, the ink and the tea, each a ritual of patience, each preparing the mind for the quiet work to come. Reading poetry and contemplating calligraphy, the tea has warmed you. Its fragrance still hangs in the air, mingling with the faint resin of the incense curling from the bronze lion burner. The scholar's gaze rests on the low table before him. where a small stack of scrolls lies neatly bound with silk cords. He unties the first, a piece of aged bamboo-colored paper, its edges faintly curled, the brushwork still dark despite the years. The characters stand like a forest in winter, each stroke deliberate, balanced, the brush lifting and pressing with the same restraint as the scholar himself now displays. The poem is one you may have heard before, though perhaps never read aloud in such stillness. His voice is low, measured, the words falling like droplets of ink upon the evening air. A moonlit courtyard. Shadows of plum blossoms sway. The ink dries, but the heart remains unfinished. He pauses after the reading, not to explain or analyze, but simply to let the poem's breath linger in the room. In the Tang Dynasty, poetry was not merely a craft. It was a way of aligning one's thoughts with the quiet rhythms of the world, a conversation between self and sky, between ink and wind. The scholar sets the scroll aside and reaches for a fresh sheet of paper. It is not yet time to write. First, he must simply look. The paper's surface is unbroken, unmarked, its fibers faintly visible under the lamplight. He tilts his head, as if the empty page already contains the first stroke, invisible to all but him. Before he writes, he reads again. Another scroll is unrolled, this one filled with short quatrains in a bolder hand. He reads two aloud, savoring their rhythm, his tone rising slightly on the second line, falling at the close. You notice that even the act of rolling and unrolling the scroll is deliberate, the silk cord drawn loose with one hand, the paper guided smoothly so no crease will mar it. In the Tang scholar's study, poetry was not consumed in haste. A single verse might be read and reread over tea, considered from every angle. The weight of its imagery, the balance of its characters, the spaces it left unspoken. The scholar's mind wanders to the poets he admires. Wang Wei, whose landscapes could be painted with 10 characters. Li Bai, whose brush danced between clarity and drunken dreaming. He closes his eyes briefly. You can tell he is arranging not just words, but the feeling those words must carry. His hand moves toward the brush, then pauses again, a kind of gentle refusal to be rushed. In the scholar's world, ink is not to be spent like coin, but placed like a seal, each drop deliberate. At last, he dips the brush into the inkstone. The bristles darken, drinking the liquid slowly, the tip narrowing to a fine point. He hovers over the paper, the first stroke already alive in his mind. Then, with a movement as smooth as water flowing around a stone, he writes. The first character appears, simple, unadorned, yet holding a subtle curve at the tail that suggests the movement of wind through bamboo leaves. The second follows, then the third. Each character is its own world, yet together they begin to form a small constellation upon the page. After a few lines, he stops. It is not because the poem is finished, but because he has written all that the moment will allow. Tang poetry is not about completion in a single sitting. It is about catching the thread of a thought and letting it rest until it is ready to return. The brush is rinsed in a shallow porcelain bowl, the ink clouding the water into a soft gray. He sets it down, replaces the paperweight over the unfinished page, and leans back slightly. Outside, the first notes of a guqin can be heard from somewhere far down the street. Slow, deliberate plucks, like raindrops falling into a still pond. The scholar pours another round of tea. You notice that he does not refill the cups entirely. He prefers them no more than half full, so that the tea may be savored while still warm, without cooling into bitterness. A few more scrolls are opened, but now he reads in silence, his lips moving without sound. The lantern's glow pools around him, leaving the corners of the study in shadow. In this light, his face seems to belong not to one moment in time, but to every scholar who has ever sat before an inkstone and allowed the night to deepen around them. When the last of the tea in your cup is gone, you realize the evening has already slipped far from its beginning. Outside, the moon has risen high enough to cast its silver light into the courtyard, where the pine needles catch it like threads of silk. The scholar places his brush aside for good. The writing will wait. The night is still young. Moonlit courtyard reflections. The lantern flame sways gently, stirred by a draft from the open lattice window. Its warm circle of light reaches only halfway across the floorboards, leaving the rest of the scholar's study in a soft, indistinct shadow. Beyond that threshold, the world is bathed in silver. The scholar rises, his robe whispering against the wooden floor. You follow him to the window, and the courtyard unfurls before you, still and luminous, as though time itself has slowed to match the pace of the moon. The garden is small, but perfectly balanced. A single crooked pine leaning toward a stone basin, the basin's surface reflecting the moon as if it were a pearl set in jade. Around the edges, moss grows thick on the low walls, its green deepened by the cool night air. Somewhere beyond sight, water drips at long intervals, the sound measured and unhurried, like a monk's breathing during meditation. The scholar steps out into the courtyard. His sandals barely disturb the gravel, each footfall leaving a faint impression that will fade by morning. You notice he does not walk directly toward the pine or the basin. Instead, he moves along the veranda's edge, letting his gaze take in the shapes and spaces of the night. The curve of the tiled roof above, the faint scent of plum blossoms drifting from a neighboring garden, the shifting shadows as clouds slide past the moon. Tang Dynasty courtyards were not designed for utility alone. They were spaces meant for thinking, for pausing between one verse and the next. Here, architecture and nature are bound together. The wooden eaves reaching out like a sheltering arm, the open sky providing a place for thoughts to travel upward and dissolve. The scholar pauses near the stone basin. He kneels, dipping his hand into the cool water. The ripples distort the moon's reflection for a moment before it reforms, perfectly still once more. Poetry, he murmurs, should be like this. His voice is low, not intended to break the quiet, but to add a thread to it. Disturbed, but only for a moment, and then whole again. A breeze stirs the pine branches, carrying the faint resinous scent toward you. Above, the moon brightens, a white coin suspended in an endless sea. The scholar tilts his head back to look, his expression unreadable, but you sense both longing and contentment in the same breath. In Tang times, the moon was more than a celestial body. It was a companion, a silent witness to solitude and reunion alike. Poets wrote to it, about it, through it, sending their verses upward as if the light itself might carry them across mountains and rivers to distant friends. The scholar turns back toward the study, but before he steps inside, he lingers at the threshold. His hand rests on the wooden frame, and for a moment he watches the faint waver of the lantern flame through the open door. Inside, the air is warmer, scented with the lingering trace of tea. Outside, the night remains vast, cool, and undisturbed. He chooses neither entirely. Instead, he settles at the veranda, one leg folded beneath him, the other dangling loosely above the gravel. The tea set is brought out, a small tray with a familiar clay pot and 2 cups, steam curling upward into the moonlight. You both drink slowly. The sound of the guqin from earlier has faded, replaced by an even greater stillness. In that stillness, every sound stands out. A night insect clicking in the bushes, the distant creak of a gate, the occasional bark of a dog far down the road. The scholar sets his cup down with care. His gaze drifts toward the low wall at the edge of the courtyard, beyond which lies the unseen street. I once traveled to Chang'an, he says quietly, and the nights there were never this quiet. Lanterns burned until dawn. Carts clattered on the stones. People recited poems in wine shops, as though competing with the noise of the city itself. But here, he lets the sentence fade, as if the rest can only be understood in silence. He pours more tea, though neither of you is in a hurry to drink. The moon is high now, casting sharp shadows of the pine across the gravel. You can see the texture of each needle in its silhouette. The scholar traces these shapes with his eyes, as if memorizing them for a painting he may one day begin. When the tea grows cold, he does not refill it. Instead, he leans back, palms on the veranda, and closes his eyes. The night air is cool enough to raise goosebumps along his arms, but he does not seem to mind. Perhaps this is the point, to feel the air, to hear the faint water drip, to let the mind wander without constraint. In the Tang scholar's life, such moments were as important as the act of writing itself. The unwritten verse, the thought half-formed but perfectly felt, was as much a part of his art as any completed poem. The moon's arc shifts again, the shadows lengthen. Somewhere inside, the lantern's oil burns lower. The scholar finally stands, collecting the empty cups. He steps back into the study, but leaves the door open, letting the moonlight follow him in. The night is not over yet. The scholar's inkstone and tools. Back inside the study, the air feels warmer. Not by much, but enough that the faint scent of tea and lamp oil wraps around you like a shawl. The scholar moves with deliberate quiet, setting the empty teacups on a low table, then returning to the main desk where his tools await. The desk itself is an old piece, its surface worn smooth by decades of use. The wood is dark, nearly black in some places, with thin cracks that resemble the branching lines of a winter river scene from above. These imperfections do not detract from its beauty. They enhance it, telling the silent story of hands that have worked here long before tonight. At the center of the desk rests the inkstone, heavy, wide, and shallow, carved from dark slate. Its edges are rounded, polished by years of handling. Beside it, a slender porcelain water dropper in the shape of a carp lies on its side, its mouth designed to release a single bead of water at a time. A block of ink, glossy and black as lacquer, rests nearby. It bears faint traces of gold dust in its engraved characters, remnants of its maker's mark. The scholar sits. He does not begin grinding the ink immediately. Instead, he holds the ink stick in his palm for a moment, feeling its weight, its coolness. Only when the silence between him and the tool feels complete does he place the first drop of water on the inkstone and begin to move the stick in slow, even circles. The sound is faint but distinct, a soft rasp like silk sliding across stone. Each rotation releases a thin cloud of scent, resinous, earthy, with a whisper of pine smoke. Tang ink sticks were often made with fragrant oils or powdered herbs, so that the act of preparation became part of the aesthetic pleasure of writing. The scholar's breathing aligns with the movement of his hand. You notice that he is not rushing to create a thick pool of ink. Instead, he seems to savor the gradual deepening of the liquid's color, watching as it turns from clear water to pale gray, then to a richer shade, then finally to black so dense it seems to drink in the lamplight. Beside the inkstone lies an assortment of brushes. Some are thick and full, with bristles of goat hair. Others are fine and sharp-tipped, made from weasel or rabbit hair. Each has a shaft of polished bamboo, some wrapped at the top with a band of carved bone or ivory. The scholar lifts one of the larger brushes and rolls it gently between his fingers. He dips it into the newly ground ink, turning the brush so the bristles drink evenly. Then, instead of writing, he lifts the brush to eye level and lets a single drop fall back into the inkstone. It lands without a splash, merging seamlessly into the surface. Tang scholars often believed that the moment before the brush touched the paper was as important as the writing itself. It was the breath before the first word of a poem, the pause before a string of the guqin was plucked. In that pause, the mind clears and the hand learns what it will do. The scholar reaches for a sheet of paper. This is not the coarse paper used for daily accounts, but fine xuanji, soft, almost translucent, made from the bark of blue sandalwood and rice straw. He places it gently on the desk, its edges held in place by two carved jade paperweights shaped like crouching tigers. When the brush meets the paper, the ink flows in a single, smooth stroke. You cannot yet tell what character is forming, but the movement is graceful and assured. The sound of bristles on paper is softer than the grinding of ink, a whisper of fibers meeting fibers. As he writes, the scholar pauses often, not because he has lost his train of thought, but because each character demands its own rhythm, its own moment of arrival. The poem seems to unfold not in lines, but in breaths. Between verses, he rinses the brush in a small ceramic bowl, shaking off the excess water in a controlled flick before returning to the inkstone. You realize that every gesture, from the grinding of the ink to the setting down of the brush, is part of a choreography refined over centuries. On a nearby shelf, more tools rest in quiet readiness. A seal carved from pale jade, its handle shaped like a sleeping lion. A small dish of cinnabar paste for stamping. Rolls of blank paper tied with silk cords. An incense burner shaped like a lotus bud, sending out a faint ribbon of smoke. Each object seems both functional and symbolic, a reminder that scholar's life was not only about producing words, but about dwelling in a space where thought and beauty were inseparable. The poem grows slowly across the page. The characters are full and balanced, each one standing like a small landscape. A mountain here, a river there, the suggestion of wind in a single curve. You do not need to read the words to feel their weight. When the final character is complete, the scholar sets down his brush and leans back. He studies the work for a long moment, then nods once, satisfied. Carefully, he takes the jade seal, presses it into the cinnabar paste, and stamps in the lower corner. The red mark blooms like a drop of sunlight on snow. The ink is left to dry naturally. The scholar rises and returns the brushes to their holders. The ink stick to its case, the paperweights to their resting place. Nothing is hurried. Even the act of cleaning the tools is done with the same care as writing the poem. When the desk is clear, the room feels different, as though the completion of the work has subtly shifted the air. The lantern's light flickers across the now empty surface, and in the background, you can still hear the slow dripping of water from the courtyard. The scholar does not read the poem aloud. Instead, he folds his hands behind his back and stands at the open doorway, gazing at the moon again. You realize that for him, the act of writing was not to capture the night, but to participate in it, to let brush, ink, and paper become another way of breathing under the same sky. The study is quiet once more, yet it feels fuller somehow, as if the silence itself has been deepened by what just took place. Incense and the philosophy of fragrance. The scholar's hand rests for a moment on the edge of the desk, feeling the faint warmth left by the oil lamp. His gaze moves toward the low shelf where a small incense burner sits, a lotus-shaped vessel of bronze, its petals open just enough to reveal the fine ash within. He walks over without haste, as though each step belongs to the flow of the evening. The lamplight catches the subtle greenish hue of the metal, highlighting the delicate engraving along the edges. Lotus flowers in Tang art often symbolized purity rising from the murky waters of daily life. And here the image feels especially apartment. The scholar has not lit incense tonight merely to scent the room, but to create a bridge between thought and stillness. From a narrow lacquered box, he selects a slender stick of aloes wood incense. Its surface is smooth, almost glossy, but when he brings it closer, the faint scent of resin and salt air rises from it, a fragrance gathered from trees that grew for decades in distant southern lands, their hearts darkened with aromatic resin. Aloes wood was rare, and even in the Tang Dynasty, it was valued more highly than gold. He takes a pinch of fine white ash from a small ceramic jar and sprinkles it evenly inside the burner, shaping it with a tiny bamboo spatula so that it forms a level bed. Then, using a thin taper, he lights the incense stick and watches the tip glow into a quiet ember before planting it upright in the ash. At first, the smoke is nearly invisible, a pale shimmer that curls upward like the thread of a spider's web. Then, as the ember deepens, the scent begins to bloom, warm, slightly sweet, carrying the faint memory of rain-soaked earth and far-off coasts. It is not a fragrance that announces itself. Rather, it waits for you to notice it, to lean closer into its subtle embrace. The scholar closes his eyes and inhales slowly. In Tang philosophy, fragrance was considered not merely a pleasure of the senses, but a discipline for the mind. Certain scents were believed to calm anger, sharpen focus, or even inspire a particular quality of poetry. Aloes wood, in particular, was associated with clarity, the ability to see to the bottom of one's own thoughts as one might gaze into a clear pond. In the stillness, the thin plume of smoke begins to spiral in the lantern's gentle draft. The movement is unhurried, each curl dissolving into the air before the next begins. Watching it feels like following the unrolling of a scroll, not with the eyes alone, but with the breath. On a side table rests a set of small ceramic cups. The scholar takes one, fills it with warm tea from the pot still sitting by the brazier, and places it near the burner. In old traditions, tea and incense often accompanied one another, their scents mingling in ways that deepened the appreciation of both. The tea's grassy aroma drifts upward to meet the resinous sweetness of the aloes wood, creating a momentary harmony. The scholar sits once more, the incense smoke rising beside him like a slow, deliberate thought. He does not open a book immediately. Instead, he rests his palms on his knees, straightening his spine. The faint crackle of the brazier and the distant drip of water in the courtyard are the only other sounds. There is a rhythm to the burn of incense. A stick like this will last perhaps half an hour, enough for the scholar to enter fully into reading, writing, or simply thinking without the intrusion of clocks or bells. When the last ember fades, it will be a gentle reminder to return to the world outside this moment. As the minutes pass, the fragrance deepens. You notice that the scent seems to shift slightly with each breath, sometimes carrying a note of sweetness, other times a dry, woody edge. This is part of incense's quiet magic. It never quite repeats itself, even as it burns from the same piece of wood. The scholar finally opens a slim volume bound in pale silk. The title, brushed in flowing calligraphy, reads Meditations on the Moon and Sea Winds. He turns the pages with a care that is almost ceremonial. The words within are not rushed either. Each poem seems written to be read in the same tempo as incense burns, slowly, with space between lines for the reader's own breath to find its place. At one point, he pauses to look at the smoke again. It is drifting toward the window now, caught in a faint current of night air. Through the open lattice, you can see a fragment of moonlight resting on the stone floor of the courtyard. The sight seems to draw a faint smile from him, not a reaction to any specific thought, but the simple recognition that fragrance, moonlight, and the present moment have aligned into something wordless yet complete. When the incense has burned down to its final inch, the scholar sets his book aside. He takes a slender pair of bronze tongs from the shelf and gently lifts the glowing tip, pressing it into the ash so it is extinguished without smoke. The faint heat radiates for a moment longer before fading into the cool stillness. The room feels subtly altered, as if the air now carries the memory of the fragrance rather than the fragrance itself. The scholar does not replace the stick immediately. Incense, like poetry, is best appreciated in measured intervals, enough to leave the senses alert for the next occasion. He returns the tools to their box, closes the lid, and rests his hand on it for a brief moment, as if sealing away not just the implements, but the calm they have brought to the evening. The lamp's light now feels warmer, more golden, as it plays across the dark wood of the desk and the folds of his robe. Outside, the courtyard is quieter still, the shadows longer. Somewhere far away, perhaps down a neighboring street, a bell tolls, not loud, but enough to suggest the passing of another hour. The scholar leans back slightly in his chair, hands folded in his lap. There is no rush to begin the next task. The scent may be gone, but the space it opened in the mind remains, a stillness that is, in its own way, as tangible as the tools on his desk. Moonlit Courtyard Reflections. The scholar rises from his chair with the same unhurried grace that has carried him through the evening. His robe sways gently as he steps toward the window, where the lattice casts delicate shadows across the floor. The air that enters is cooler now, touched by the scent of damp stone and the faint sweetness of garden soil after the day's warmth. He unlatches the wooden frame and swings it open. The sound it makes, a low, careful creak, seems to join the night's own quiet music. Beyond the sill, the courtyard stretches out in muted silver, bathed in moonlight. The scholar takes a small lantern from the wall hook beside the door. It is a round paper lantern, painted with brushstrokes of plum blossoms in pale ink. He lights it with a thin taper from the desk lamp, the flame catching in a soft glow that turns the painted blossoms into faint silhouettes. When he steps outside, the world changes. The air feels more open, yet heavier with stillness. Each sound, the whisper of his sandals on the stone, the far-off rustle of bamboo leaves, stands out against the silence like strokes on an empty scroll. The moon hangs above the roofline, not full but broad and bright, its edges softened by a faint haze. In Tang times, the moon was more than a simple companion of the night. It was a bridge across distances. Poets wrote of gazing at the same moon as friends far away, of lovers separated by rivers and mountains, of ancestors whose graves lay under that same silver light. The scholar, though alone here, feels the quiet kinship of that thought. He crosses the courtyard slowly, his lantern swaying beside him, casting a warm halo on the pale flagstones. The shadows of the wooden pillars stretch and bend with his movement. In the corner of the courtyard, a low stone basin catches moonlight like a shallow pool of mercury. Its surface ripples faintly, not from any wind, but from a slow trickle of water that falls from a bamboo spout. The scholar kneels beside it. He places the lantern on the ground, so its glow mingles with the moon's reflection in the basin, turning the water into a shifting play of gold and silver. He dips his fingers in. The coolness is sharp at first, then softens into a gentle weight against the skin. Water, in its calm state, mirrors the world without judgment. In its flowing state, it speaks of impermanence. From here, the scent of the garden reaches him more clearly. There is the faint, almost shy fragrance of night-blooming jasmine along the wall, and somewhere a single osmanthus tree offers its honey-sweet aroma, even though its blossoms are small enough to hide in the palm of a hand. The scholar stays by the basin for a long time, simply listening. The slow drop of water into the pool marks the seconds like a pulse. Above, a night bird calls once, then falls silent again, as though reconsidering the need for speech. Eventually, he rises and walks toward the garden's edge, where a stone path leads between beds of ornamental grass. The moonlight glimmers on each blade, the dew forming tiny beads like strings of pearls. His sandals make a soft brushing sound here, almost like the turning of silk pages. The far wall of the courtyard holds a small circular moon gate, its opening framing a portion of the night sky. The scholar pauses there, looking through it as though it were the lens of a telescope or the rim of a painting. Beyond lies the darker silhouette of the outer garden, where taller bamboo sways just enough to catch the light along their narrow edges. He does not pass through the gate. Instead, he rests his hand lightly on its stone curve, feeling the faint chill that has settled there from the evening air. This circle, in garden design, is more than an entrance. It is a symbol of unity and completion, a reminder that one may see the world differently simply by changing the frame. A faint breeze stirs now, carrying with it the rustle of the bamboo beyond the wall. The scholar closes his eyes for a moment, letting that sound become the whole of the world. The air brushes past his sleeve, shifts the edge of his robe, and then is gone again. When he opens his eyes, the courtyard feels subtly transformed, not because anything visible has changed, but because he himself has settled deeper into the present. The moon's position has shifted slightly, the shadows of the pillars angling more sharply across the stones. He makes his way back toward the center of the courtyard. There, he pauses to look upward. The sky is a deep, soft indigo, and between the stars there are darker spaces that seem as full of meaning as the lights themselves. The Tang poets often said that the night sky was a scroll written by the heavens, with constellations forming the characters and the blackness between them forming the spaces where the reader's own mind must enter. Finally, the scholar returns to the house. He lifts the lantern from the stone, its light steady in his grasp. As he crosses the threshold, he glances back once more at the moonlit courtyard. The basin still glimmers, the shadows still stretch long and thin, and somewhere in the dark, the jasmine continues to release its scent into the cool night air. When he closes the door, the room inside feels warmer, but not cut off from the world outside. The moonlight seems to follow him in memory, as if its glow has settled quietly into the folds of his robe and the chambers of his mind. Calligraphy by lamplight. The door closes with a muted thud, and the room receives him again, a space of layered shadows and warm, steady light. The oil lamp on his desk burns with a quiet steadiness, its flame swaying just enough to make the paper on the walls breathe in the glow. The air inside holds a faint mingling of tea steam and lamp oil, overlaid with the subtle perfume of the sandalwood incense still burning low in the corner. The scholar sets the lantern down by the desk, its paper sides now paling against the stronger golden light of the oil lamp. Outside, the moon has taken its place above the courtyard. Inside, the lamplight reigns, drawing the eye back to the scroll laid out in careful readiness. The table's surface is clean except for a few essentials. The brush stand, holding several brushes of differing thicknesses. The inkstone, its surface smooth and still damp from the grinding earlier in the evening. And the heavy paper, pale and textured, awaiting the first stroke. He sits once more, adjusting his robe around his knees. The chair creaks faintly, a familiar note in this well-used room. Before lifting a brush, he reaches for the teacup and takes a slow sip. The tea is cooler now, but the faint bitterness at the end is more pronounced, leaving a clean echo on the tongue. He chooses a medium brush, one that balances flexibility with firmness, and holds it with the practiced grip that years of writing have made second nature. Dipping the tip into the inkstone, he stirs the black pool gently, feeling the faint resistance of liquid against hair. When he lifts it, the ink clings to the brush in a perfect taper, ready to transfer to the page. The first character is always the most deliberate. He lowers the brush, breath held lightly, and draws the opening stroke with steady pressure. The brush moves like a creature alive, its tip responsive to the smallest shift in his fingers. He lifts it slowly, letting the tail of the stroke fade into the paper like the last note of a Guqin string. Tonight, he writes not for correspondence or commission, but for the pleasure of shaping words into form, the union of thought and movement. The poem he chooses is an old Tang verse, one he has recited often in quiet moments. Beside my bed, the bright moonlight, like frost upon the ground. I lift my head to gaze at the moon, then lower it, thinking of home. As each character forms beneath his hand, the air seems to deepen around him. The sound of the brush on paper is almost imperceptible, a whisper softer than breath. Between each character, he pauses to let the ink settle, the faint sheen of wetness catching the lamplight. Calligraphy, in this scholar's world, is not simply writing. It is a conversation between the visible and the invisible. Each stroke is both a mark on the page and a reflection of the inner state. A hurried mind produces strokes that tremble. A steady heart leaves lines that flow like water. He leans slightly forward, the robe's sleeves pooling at the edge of the desk. His movements are unhurried, each line drawn with the weight of centuries behind it. This is the same art that graced the walls of Tang palaces and humble homes alike, the same art that traveled on scrolls between friends separated by vast distances. When the final character is complete, he lifts the brush and holds it above the inkstone. A small bead of ink drops into the black pool, sending out a faint ripple. He sets the brush back on its stand, then leans back in his chair, letting his gaze travel across the finished lines. The strokes are balanced but not rigid, alive yet not restless, exactly as he hoped. He places a small red seal at the lower corner of the page, pressing it into the paper with the same care as the first stroke. The cinnabar mark blooms against the pale sheet like a quiet flame. For a while, he simply sits there, letting the room breathe around him. The oil lamp's flame bends slightly as a small draft enters from the half-open window. Outside, a cricket resumes its song, as if sensing that the stillness has been restored. The scholar takes another sip of tea, cooler still, yet now almost sweet in its quiet way. He glances at the completed work once more, then rolls the scroll with a soft rustle, securing it with a silk cord. Whether it will be sent to a friend, stored for later, or simply kept as a private meditation? He does not yet decide. The night, after all, is not over. Closing the study for the night, the oil lamp has burned lower, its flame drawing smaller shadows across the desk. The air inside the study is cooler now, carrying a faint reminder that the world beyond these walls is moving deeper into night. Somewhere outside, the breeze stirs the bamboo again, a whisper through slender leaves, like the turning of silk pages in the dark. The scholar sits for a moment longer in stillness, his hands resting lightly on his knees. Before him, the desk is returned to order, brushes rinsed and resting in their stand, the inkstone cleaned and dried, the calligraphy scroll rolled and tied. Only the teacup remains, a half swallow of liquid catching the lamplight in a thin crescent. He drains the last sip, the tea now cool, but holding the ghost of its fragrance. The small clay pot beside the lamp is empty, a reminder of how the hours have passed unnoticed. Rising slowly, he gathers the few things that belong elsewhere. The scroll, which he places into a carved wooden box lined with soft cloth, the tea set, which he carries to the low table by the wall, and the lantern, still folded from earlier, which he will take outside. Before extinguishing the lamp, he takes a final look around the study. Every object here is both functional and a quiet companion to his hours. The shelves of books and scrolls that line the walls, the guqin resting in its case, the small potted orchid whose leaves arch gracefully in the lamp's glow. These things have been with him so long that they have absorbed something of his presence, and he of theirs. The lamp's flame bends once more as he lifts the glass and blows gently. Darkness folds into the corners of the room, leaving only the faint silver of moonlight through the window. He opens the door to the courtyard. Cool night air flows in, carrying the damp scent of earth and stone. The moonlight is stronger here, washing the paving stones in pale brightness and turning the garden's leaves into 1,000 shades of silver. In the center of the courtyard, a single stone basin catches the moon's reflection. The surface of the water is perfectly still, holding the sky in its mirror. He pauses by it, watching a drifting cloud pass across the reflected moon, the change happening in silence. A few steps away, the bamboo leans in the breeze, its shadows shifting like ink strokes on the white wall behind it. Somewhere higher up, a night bird gives a short, mellow call before disappearing into the dark. The scholar lights the folded lantern once again, this time for the short walk to his sleeping quarters. The paper sides bloom softly with golden light, and he moves slowly across the courtyard, his footsteps brushing against the stones. The lantern's glow mingles with the moonlight, a blending of warmth and coolness, the two balancing each other perfectly. As he reaches the far side of the courtyard, he turns once to look back. Through the open door of the study, he can just make out the pale square of the desk where the evening's work was done. The room looks empty now, but its stillness holds the memory of each movement, each stroke of the brush, each slow sip of tea. He closes the door gently, not to seal the room away, but to let it rest until the next evening. The lantern sways slightly in his hand as he moves along the covered walkway. Above, the moon follows him, casting his shadow onto the wooden panels beneath his feet. Inside his sleeping chamber, the bed is laid out with its light quilt, the faint scent of clean linen in the air. He sets the lantern down on the low table, watching the shadows settle once more against the walls. The night feels deeper here. Beyond the thin wooden shutters, the sounds of the courtyard have quieted. Only the faint rustle of bamboo remains, joined now and then by the distant bark of a dog from somewhere down the lane. He changes into his night robe, the fabric soft and worn from many years of use, and lies down, the quill drawing gently over him. Through the shutters, a thin beam of moonlight falls across the floor, pale as a brushstroke on white paper. The scholar closes his eyes. In the last moment before sleep, he sees again the desk and lamplight, the black ink flowing onto the page, the steam curling from the teacup, and a stillness that wrapped around it all like a quiet robe. Outside, the moonlight remains. The lamp has gone out. The scroll is rolled and tied. The last sip of tea is gone. Outside, the garden sleeps under the moon. The bamboo bends to the breeze. The stone basin holds the sky in its reflection. The scholar walks slowly away, his lantern swaying in his hand. Shadows stretch and fade along the covered walkway, and the door to the study closes softly behind him. The room will rest now, as the night continues its silent watch. In this place, time does not hurry. The ink will wait. The brush will wait. The poems will still be there when the lantern is lit again. And so the evening ends, not with an ending, but with a pause, as if the night itself is holding its breath. Sleep well. May your dreams be as quiet as the moon over the courtyard.